Good morning and welcome back to another live stream of the DD Geopolitics show. I am your host, Sarah. Please visit us at ddgeopolitics.com. We have new artwork up and new articles from our Substack writers. I am joined today by Daniel McAdams, director of the Ron Paul Institute, a renowned conflict journalist, anti-imperialist, and very well-known anti-war activist. Daniel, how are you?
Thank you, Sarah, for having me. I'm terrific. How are you?
It's really, we had to cancel yesterday because we weren't feeling good, and everything kind of erupted. So I think it was kind of fate because this is totally your wheelhouse. And the interesting thing is that I have evolved from not liking the protests into what your opinion pretty much is. So let's get started. So for my listeners, since I have a really large international audience, could you just give a little summary of what the Ron Paul Institute, how based Ron Paul is, and what you guys are doing?
So we started the Ron Paul Institute right after Dr. Paul retired from Congress in 2013. And what we did basically is we brought two parts of the Ron Paul congressional world that I was most involved in, and that's foreign policy and non-interventionism, along with civil liberties at home. We brought those into the Ron Paul Institute, and that's what we essentially focus on those two things. We publish, we have the daily Ron Paul Liberty Report, and we have big and very great conferences once a year in Washington, D.C., and usually once a year in Houston and occasionally in other places. So that's our main focus for non-interventionism, civil liberties at home.
Yep. So the Ukraine war is in a really weird phase. I don't really want to get into I'm not talking about a weird phase on the front. I'm talking about a weird phase in culture. Has your opinion changed about the Ukraine war? Have you noticed a shift? I feel like we've become apathetic about the Ukraine war as a whole, but really okay with the Israeli war. So has your opinion changed, or what have you observed?
I think the bad guys are getting ever more depraved on the Ukraine war. I mean, the one thing about the neocons, and it's been said many times by many people, but they have no reverse gear. They don't even have a braking system, right? So it's everything that they've done, everything that they've gotten the United States into has been an absolute disaster. And by the way, neocons are on the left and the right, or whatever those two words even mean. Everything they've brought us into has been an absolute disaster, and they have no ability for self-reflection. What they say when they're faced, when it's put right in their face, this sucked and it was all you're doing, is, well, you didn't do it hard enough and it's your fault, not mine. And so that's what we're seeing here with Ukraine. And it's weird how you're seeing the mainstream media now. They should be in a jubilant phase. $61 more billion. Victory is around the corner. That's what we were told for the first year and a half or so. But now it's all gloom and doom. You got your money, you're getting your weapons. But look at headline after headline. Well, the White House is skeptical that Ukraine can win even with this money. It's really interesting to see that. And that's why you're seeing, I think, a lot of talk. And there's a major piece in Foreign Affairs and a few other pieces talking about, well, we're going to have to put some troops in there. This other stuff's not working. So it's just incredible how this is devolving into what they wanted in the first place, which is World War III with Russia.
Exactly. We've started entering into this troops on the ground conversation while the Israeli thing is heating up. And it's kind of not been discussed that much. So I'm glad you mentioned it. So I'm going to show this video real quick, and I hope you don't get too upset. I know it upsets me, but viewer discretion is advised, I guess. Here we go. That's the passing of the aid bill as we watch our Congress erupt into Ukrainian flags and ecstasy. What are your thoughts? What about the delay and the dilly-dallying of the Ukraine bill and then kind of tucking the Israeli money under it? And what are your thoughts?
Well, the one thing about that video, if I'm not mistaken, that's the one that was shot by Thomas Massie, representative from Kentucky. And when he put that up on Twitter, he got a call from the House Sergeant at Arms saying, you better take that down or I'm going to give you a $500 fine, which is interesting because Massie commented, the people who are waving foreign flags on the floor of the House, they didn't get in any trouble at all. It was me who tried to show the American people what these people are literally what they're doing on the floor of the House. I'm the one that got in trouble. So, I mean, really, in a 2 or 3 second video, it just shows the mindlessness of the vast majority of people in Congress, the absolute sheep mentality. And I worked on the Hill for 11 years for Dr. Paul. I know very well this is, and I'm sure it's a lot worse than it was when we left 10 or so years ago. but there is an unbelievable lack of curiosity. I say this over and over because it surprises people. Lack of curiosity. Members of Congress are among the most ill-read, ill-informed people that you would ever meet in society. They only read a very narrow layer of the mainstream media, and they know nothing about the issues. I mean, we saw Speaker Johnson when he was pushing for this bill to pass, when he was making his axis of evil speech. And I've mentioned this before, but he kept looking down to his hand, because what he had in his hand was a piece of paper upon which are written what we call talking points. And members would tell their staff, don't tell me about the bill, don't tell me about the issue, just give me a couple talking points. Now, Dr. Paul wasn't like that, but the vast majority of members, they don't want to know what it's all about. Just give me 4 or 5 things that I can say. I'll practice it, and basically, like some kind of fake robot, I'll recite the lines. And that really is it in a nutshell.
What were your feelings seeing that video? I know when I saw it, the video with the earlier videos, Nancy Pelosi kind of waving the flag. I mean, that was kind of a spectacle and a meme. But then I don't know why this past one was so alarming to me. I was like, this is so mindless. This is like Stepford Wives, Stepford Congress. And exactly what you said. Are they just sheep? But then I feel like that also takes away their agency. Do you like they're still people? They still have choices. So are they consciously doing that? Like, what are we doing here? I'm trying to, I always try to figure out the why. And yes, our Congress people are so stupid, but also, is it just for Democrat campaign money, or is it something else, or what's going on?
Well, I'm the last thing from an American nationalist, right? But I felt pissed off when I
Yes,
saw
me
these
too.
guys. Like, what the hell are you doing? What do you do? This is basically like rubbing your face in it. I just stole $61 billion from you and from your children and from your future, and now I'm going to rub your nose in it. I mean, the optics were astonishing, and that will come back to haunt these people, just like every other boneheaded thing they've ever done. 5 or 6 years after the Iraq war turned into a disaster. Oh, how could we have possibly known? We had no idea. That's BS. You had access to all the information you wanted, and you chose to make a decision this way. So don't blame anyone else but yourself. But they will. They'll blame everyone else.
Okay, if, through the lens of maybe like Ron Paul and your ideology, because that's something we don't get on the show very often. Can you compare and contrast these two conflicts? We see the Ukraine one, it's more of a formidable conflict, 2 armies. We have the Ukraine or the Israeli one. What do you see as the difference between the imperialistic elements of the Israeli one, maybe the different elements of the Russian one, the anti-Western sentiment of the Russian one, and the upholding of Judeo-Christian values, quote unquote, and the other one? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there are many components to this that we can discuss on a very deeper level, and I'm fascinated by the idea of a radical shift in world order. But from the perspective, as you would say, like our philosophical perspective, it all comes back to U.S. interventionism. I mean, and you can go back to 2014, you can go back to late 2013 when the Maidan was launched. You could go back to 2004, 2005 with the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. In where the U.S., of course, overthrew Yanukovych at that time. He got reelected. They overthrew him again. So at its bare core, at its elemental stage, this is all about U.S. foreign policy interventionism with Israel. If the U.S. had not been backstopping Israel for decades, giving them anything they wanted like a spoiled child, and turned the other way, while they were slaughtering people, they would have had to find a way to make peace in their neighborhood. They would not have been able to let this violence and hatred just fester until it's come to the surface and turned into genocidal acts. So the core problem with all of this is this messianic idea that we have not only the right, but the obligation to rule the rest of the world and to tell them exactly how they should live and what kind of political systems they should have. And that is the core of all problems.
I just find it interesting that we've kind of like born and raised, well, not really born in the Israeli case, but we've kind of reared these fascist puppet regimes. And I feel like, do you ever think we may be turning into one?
No, Well, certainly, I mean, in every sense of the word, fascist in the clear sense of the word, which is corporatist, in the Mussolini sense of the word, where the corporate sector and the government sector collude. And what do they want to do? They want to squash dissent, and we could talk about that, too, with regard to the protests. They want to squash competition, get the small guy out, whatever you can, in to the benefit of the corporate elite. So that is definitely the case. But I lived in Hungary in the 1990s, right after the Cold War ended. I moved over there and spent that time there, and I watched very, very closely from up close. I was doing human rights and election monitoring, and these were the very first round of color revolutions. It started, I would say, you could debate it. I would say it started in Albania in 1992 with the U.S.-backed coup against Sali Berisha there at that time, but it morphed and it changed. It adopted new elements. You had Slovakia in 98. You had Croatia in 97 with Tudjman. So you had certain elements that were adapted and used. The National Endowment for Democracy was heavily involved in it. But it came to sort of the culmination, I would say, in the Maidan coup of 2014, which is where the element of extreme violence was incorporated. And it proved to be very, very successful. And so we've seen that since then, I think.
Oh, would you consider yourself a free speech absolutist? I'm asking because we have in our country, and maybe our international viewers don't know about this, but in our country, we've had a lot of heavy debate and protesting around what amounts to be free speech laws and actually free speech. So would you consider yourself a free speech absolutist?
Absolutely. I'm an absolute absolutist, okay, when it comes to free speech. There obviously there are going to be consequences. You may piss someone off and you may get bopped in the nose. There are consequences to it, but the government should never come between should never in any way restrict what we have to say. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're in church, someone can march in and demand equal time for an opposite, theology. That's not the case. That's why we have the wonderful concept of private property in the U.S., where you can restrict speech on your own property. You can't force your way into my home and force me to listen to you lecturing me or what have you. But certainly in the public sphere, which is what public universities are, for better or for worse, you cannot restrict people's speech as long as it's not physically violent speech. It can be extraordinarily provocative. It can be hate speech, whatever that is. But it can't be restricted. It shouldn't be restricted. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now.
Who defines what hate speech is?
It's a thought crime. There's no such thing. It's a thought crime.
Still looking for that guy who decides.
Yeah, it's a thought crime.
I'm asking this to kind of build up a preface to, we have an eruption of protests, but mostly among college students. We've seen really great sustained street protests in the UK. And I just don't think that form of protest really works here because we're so big and spread out. Protests are about kind of being in your face and being inconvenienced. So I actually think that these college university protests are a good thing. But I do want to know your thoughts. So first we start off at Columbia. Now, the thing about the Columbia protests is Columbia is kind of a shit lib school. Sorry to say that.
Expensive shit lib school.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to Texas A&M or something like that. It's not like a down home school. So I kind of had my own reservations about it from the beginning. I'm not going to pay attention to some Columbia students. They could protest, go ahead and have your fun, but I'm not, whatever, go ahead and have fun. And then they started, I started noticing it was getting co-opted. The Columbia ones were clean enough and cute enough for the Democratic Party to start to co-opt. And they start bringing in these, the Congress people. I believe Ilhan Omar went down there and gave a speech. So now it's a campaign. So I was like, I'm done with these friggin' protests. Then they do stupid things where, and I'll show here they all bought the same tents. So now the conservatives are like, well, they have the same tents. Yeah. It's really just from their Amazon wish list. But regardless. What did you think about the Columbia protests when you saw? Norm Finkelstein's down there, Danny Shaw, they're all down there.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it that way because I have the same instinctive apprehension about protests. It's just in my DNA. I'm from a previous generation, let's put it gently, and I remember from my days at Berkeley the anti-apartheid protests, and I found an enormous amount of cynicism and hypocrisy among the protesters, even though the cause, of course, was just. So my instinctive reaction is something is fishy here. I don't buy it. There's a lot of strange stuff going on. But like you, especially when I started to, I mean, it hit me yesterday when I started to see the crackdown at UT Austin, and I started to see violence that was unprovoked. And then when I saw it, it just sort of seemed like it hit like wildfire across the country. And that's when I thought there's something interesting going on here, and it's beyond this kind of cooked up thing that you would expect from a color revolt. Yeah.
Exactly what I thought. I didn't like Colombia. I just disregarded it. I was like, let Norm have his fun with his kids.
Yeah.
I was like, good. I'm glad that they're having fun. It didn't seem violent. It was whatever. And I'll never, ever, ever tell somebody, don't protest, don't boycott. If that's something that you feel that you need to do, it actually builds camaraderie and etc. and solidarity, go forth and be happy. I'm not going to protest because I'm lazy and I have a back injury, but you go for it. You guys protest. But then I saw I heard, through the rumor mill, they're planning on more. And I said, well, if it spreads, then we'll see. And I expected it to spread in Manhattan. I didn't expect it to pop up at USC. So let's look at the first video that I have uploaded here. This is the first one at USC. And I'm going to read you this ridiculous tweet by Richard. I can never pronounce his name. Hanania.
Oh, God. Okay.
But I have to. So this is from rotund Black officers versus white students at USC. Everyone, please keep in mind that Richard is a Palestinian. So, okay. Versus white students at USC. The optics couldn't be better for conservatives. All right, let's pull up the video. Back up! Back up! Keystone Cops come to harangue the students. Well, what do you think about Richard's tweet and what he brought up about the optics for conservatives?
Yeah, I think he occasionally makes good observations. I've stopped reading the stuff that he writes. He's like intentionally autistic or something. I don't know what it is. I never quite get it. So, but it definitely is. And I think there's a lot of special interest trying to make hay on it. Certainly the right wing in the U.S., the Daily Wire types, they're desperate to prevent anyone from having a notion for longer than a quarter of a second that this isn't all just crazed, woke BLM supporters. And that's why they're terrified of having anyone who's not like that to come out and speak in favor of these things.
Well, what do you think about Greg Abbott's tweet where Greg Abbott in 2019 went out with we was doing free speech videos and selfies about free speech and passing laws about free speech. And then it was actually Greg Abbott's tweet, and I don't have it on hand, but it was Greg Abbott's tweet that made me say something's going on here. Yeah. And it was when he said, we will not allow anti-Semitism and our public universities. And I was like, wait a minute, what's happening? What's going on? Well, did you see that tweet that he said?
I did. Yeah, I wrote about it actually in my update to our subscribers. Yeah,
we have a governor that's kind of at odds with the government, but not in a way that it benefits us. It benefits him. So I was like, okay, he's just using this as a crux to kind of actually go against the federal government, but his views align with the federal government. So what do you think is going on with Greg Abbott? He's also a WEF kid, a staunch Zionist. So what do you think is going on down there in Texas? And then we'll talk about actual protests.
I mean, he's a theocrat. I mean, this is ironic because the big beef of people like this about Iran is that it's a theocracy. Dude, you're just as much a theocrat as anyone else, and so is Speaker Johnson. Well, I think those people who are believing realize that we have to support Israel or God's going to come get us or something insane. I mean, these people are theocrats and they're trying to foist their personal theocracy on the rest of the country. And it's dangerous because Abbott's tweet was exactly that. These students belong in jail. The next line, anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas. Well, you could personally find anti-Semitism to be abhorrent. I find it extremely distasteful. In my religion, it's considered a sin. Nevertheless, it cannot be considered illegal if you have a First Amendment, which prohibits the federal government or any government from inhibiting what you say, with very, very, very narrow exceptions. So yes, a person can be anti-Semitic and can say anti-Semitic things. They shouldn't be thrown in jail for it. And in fact, as I wrote in my update yesterday, even Matt Walsh, who's a right-winger, he's on the Daily Wire grift, even he felt compelled to say, I don't quite get this Abbott thing because I hate these protesters, but you can't arrest people for saying anti-Semitic things. And that's a fact. But Abbott's also passed legislation in Texas outlawing support of BDS. You can't do business with the state unless you sign a pledge that you will never support a boycott of Israel, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's pretty crazy stuff.
I do have a video of the protest before we really get into Christian Zionism and fascism, but a video of the protest in University of Texas, which we were just discussing. Greg Abbott, Max Blumenthal tweeted this. Here we go. I mean, this is crazy. This is bonkers.
Yeah, I had actually one of our friends, one of our supporters of the Institute. She wrote to me this morning and said, you know, my child goes to UT. My child was walking around campus yesterday, and my child saw all of these people. They were peaceful. They were on the lawn. They were saying their slogans, what have you. Nothing was happening. There was no violence. There was no intimidation. Then all of a sudden, this huge column of cops came and started bonking everyone over the head and arresting them. And that's when the violence started. I mean, this is an eyewitness that's there saying that this. And even Alex Jones, of all people, he tweeted out yesterday, I have reporters on the ground there, and I can tell you with absolute certainty there was no violence until the cops came in. So they're literally trying to provoke violence.
Yeah, we have people on the ground doing a live space on Twitter, and he said the same. Didn't get weird until the cops came down, which then tells me the other thing. I think that these are very organic, and I still have questions about the Columbia protests because of the reaction to that, who's been visiting that one. And I'm not talking about you, Norm. I'm talking about Ilan and Rashida Tlaib. You might want to know why they're down there and who sent them and why. I posted a really good quote today from Ernest Hemingway because I want to talk about fascism. The tweet or the quote is, "Are you a communist?" No, I'm an anti-fascist. For a long time? Well, since I've understood fascism. But that's the thing. Nobody here understands fascism. And I feel like the United States has done such a good job of incrementally moving us in this direction that we didn't even notice it. And I fear it might be too late. I actually wrote something last night. I said, first they came for the whistleblowers, which was obviously Julian Assange. And then they came for the J6ers, which I didn't support J6, but I'm going to support the protesters regardless. Yeah. And then they came for the Israel protesters, pro-Palestine protesters. So how do you think we teach Americans what fascism is? Because it really hasn't existed here in a really good iteration to give them an example.
Yeah, it's hard because the word suffers from being overused, you know, and it's diluted the impact that it should have, kind of like racism as well. I mean, it's used to mean someone who's bad, who I don't like, you know. But if you talk about the emergence of the national security state, which is what we're seeing, and my good friend Jacob Hornberger at the Future of Freedom Foundation writes a lot about the national security state and how it emerged after the assassination of JFK. And they've basically taken control of all aspects of our lives. And I think we're seeing that certainly on the campuses. We're seeing it in our foreign policy. We're seeing it in this unholy relationship between corporate power, i.e. the military-industrial complex, and the government. And that is all certainly part of the Ukraine aid and the Israel aid and the Taiwan aid. So it's a corporatist, fascist state that has emerged. And you're right, most people don't quite see it because it doesn't touch them personally yet.
It will. I mean, fascism always does. Fascism reaches out and touches everybody. Everything for the state, nothing outside the state. So do you think that it was deliberate to push us in this direction, or is this just natural? Because, you brought up a really good point. You said corporatist being the military industrial complex. I think people forget that our military industrial complex is private. It's not public like in other countries. So the marriage between corporate and state it is also Jeff Bezos and Joe Biden, but it's really the military industrial complex and the government. And so do you think that it was just inevitable because back in the 90s, it really became the military industrial complex with private contract in the 80s and 90s, and then it's going to naturally just slide into fascism? Or do you think that it just happened this way because it's inevitable?
Well, I think, a couple of things. The growth of the state is always bad, in my opinion, because the state always, the right and the left both compete to get control of the state because they think that they can get it and harness it to do good, and neither can. The problem is it's an evil entity that will always oppress as it grows. So the growth of the state, and also the stakes are much higher. That's why people will spend, $10 million on a congressional seat that pays $150,000 a year. Okay, that doesn't make sense, because when they get in there, take a look at their stock portfolio. They leave with a couple $1,000,000. You just do the right votes, and you'll be okay. So the stakes are so high because big business found that it could prosper by getting in bed with government, put a little bit of money into lobbyists. I mean, look how effective from a financial perspective the military-industrial complex's lobbying is. They'll make billions of dollars. They'll spend maybe $1 million or $2 million on lobbyists, what have you. I'm just making the numbers up, but that sort of proportion. And then they'll get another $1 billion tranche. And that's what this $61 billion for Ukraine is all about too. So it pays off. Someone will slit your throat for $20. Think what they do for $20 billion.
Exactly. And can you dive into a little bit more of our domestic politics about the Ukraine aid bill? Because I saw it as the Democrats really wanted the UK or the Ukraine aid bill, and the Republicans were not on board with the UK or the Ukraine aid bill, but they were like, we need this Israel bill. And the Democrats kind of wanted to marry the two together, and there was like resistance to that. And now we have them in one aid package.
Well, the two parties trade off, but in this case, the Democratic Party was the evil party and the Republicans were the stupid party. They often trade hats, but the Republicans, they basically pulled Biden's chestnuts out of the fire with the Ukraine vote, because the last thing he wanted after having lost Afghanistan was to have ads run against him about, you lost Ukraine, Putin, Hitler he's now in Brussels. He's off to Paris, that's the last thing they wanted. So you had a very peculiar situation where Mike Johnson, who voted for the early Ukraine money, but that's of course when everyone was in a frenzy and we had to do it, or Saddam Hussein or whoever was going to nuke us, but once that sort of died down and they sobered up, he voted against that money, and he said it was against that money, and he said it was against the reauthorization of Section 702 of FISA. He said all of these things, and he said he would never, ever approach this foreign military aid without a strong border bill. He's on record over and over saying that. Then all of a sudden, he folded like a house of cards. It was one of the strangest things I've ever seen. And his excuse was as flimsy, as a wet T-shirt. I mean, he said, well, when I was on the Judiciary Committee, I saw plenty of abuses by the FBI, thousands and thousands of them. But then I went into a classified briefing and I changed my mind. Are you like in third grade? Really?
Well, wasn't the TikTok ban also tucked into that bill? Republicans wanted that TikTok ban, right?
Yeah, Republicans wanted the TikTok ban. I mean, I don't think just the Republicans wanted the TikTok ban. I think Jonathan Greenblatt wanted the TikTok ban. The head of ADL. I mean, he's on recording saying we've got a TikTok problem. We are losing America's youth. They're no longer pro-Israel. We've got to do something about it. Boom! A month later, TikTok is banned.
What does that say about us?
It says that the corruption runs really, really deep in our society, and I think Dr. Paul would always say that our political class is really a reflection of our own morality. I mean, there's something sick in our society that's electing sick and very evil venal people, I think. And that's, I don't know what the self-reflection. I mean, okay, I'll tell you what I think part of it is American exceptionalism. You know, we have this idea that we are somehow chosen by God to lead the rest of the world into this wonderful political nirvana, and you damn well better like it, or we're going to shoot you and kill you. You know, we'll bomb you. We'll sanction you first, and then we'll bomb you. And if that doesn't work, well, then we'll Gaddafi you. You know, that's what it's all about. And somehow we need like a national therapy to get over this idea that, you know, we can love our country. I love a lot of things about America, but that doesn't mean that we're exceptional. We can push everyone else around.
Well, you mentioned American exceptionalism, and then you mentioned God. So we went through American history. We had our little manifest destiny, had a little bit of God in there, but now we have this weird, what Chris Hedges calls Christian fascism, which is actually these Christian imperialists, which are just Christian Zionists. Do you think that they like? I remember talking to somebody a few years ago. They're like, "That's not a thing anymore. They don't have any power." I think they're more powerful now than ever. Like they even tried to make the case that as soon as Chris wrote that the book was obsolete, I said the book is more important now than ever. But what do you think about like the Christian Zionists? Can we get like the Christian Zionists really don't have a ton to lose, if that makes sense? They're not sons and daughters aren't fighting. They're, it's not their really religion being ripped apart. How do we get them to be like, dude, can we, or are they just so maniacal that they're just too far gone?
It's difficult because, you and I can, even if we disagreed on a particular aspect of policy, we could have a rational discussion. I could try to bring some evidence that this might not be the right thing, the best thing, and you could present some counter evidence. But when you deal with someone's core beliefs, it's very difficult because it's emotional, But my good friend Tom Woods, the great libertarian communicator, he once wrote, and I'm going to misquote him, but basically he said the theology of the Christian Zionists would be absolutely alien, even to the forget about the church at the time of Christ, but to the but to the Reformation people, they wouldn't recognize this theology whatsoever, this eschatology. It's something that's completely new. It was invented at the beginning of the 20th century out of whole cloth with the Scofield Bible, which rewrote the Bible. There's little annotations in the Bible that completely changed the meaning of the Bible. So it's a heretical cult that purports to be within Christianity, and people are going to be upset with me, but it's just a fact, that purports to be a part of Christianity, but absolutely separates itself on very, very critical aspects of Christianity, essentially Christ's message to the believers. So, but it's very, very dangerous. I mean, the Heaven's Gate cult was dangerous, but only to themselves because they all killed themselves. But this has the ability to get all of us killed, and that's why I think it needs to be addressed.
How about when do you think that we really became so integrated with Israel in terms of the citizenry? Because, it wasn't like that when Israel was first founded. We kind of were, critical of Israel probably up until the 70s, after JFK, 80s. So how did they get so intertwined? I mean, now we have Israeli citizens in our Congress. These are people that go back and forth to Israel. We have people that have served in the IOF in our Congress. I mean, this is really interesting. How did it get, and when did it get like this?
Well, I think it's been a little bit more recently since the 70s. I mean, you had in the 90s George Herbert Walker Bush, who was very, very pissed off over settlements, and he threatened to withhold U.S. aid to Israel because they kept building settlements, and he lost that election. He was a one-termer, so there's a lesson for the rest of you kids out there. And Obama had the same situation. He had he took a lot of heat because he was concerned, like Biden is now, but Biden doesn't kind of have it upstairs. But Obama was smart enough to realize my base doesn't like these settlements. I got to do something about it, and got into trouble for it. So again, you have this kind of unholy situation where we send a ton of money there. You have strange constituencies in the U.S. that are, most of them are, as we say, Christian Zionists, because ironically, among the Jewish community in America, you've got a very, very, very healthy chunk of them who couldn't care less about Israel. It's the last thing they care about. So you have a lot of money changing hands, and you have a lot of strong arming. You have AIPAC's use of campaign funds. I mean, I remember when Cynthia McKinney, who was in Congress when we were there, what they did to her. She came from a poor district in Georgia. She didn't buy the APAC line, and they simply brought in a bunch of money from New York and unseated her. So there is that. I mean, it goes back to Paul Findley's "They Dare to Speak Out," which is a classic book that I would highly recommend if anyone hasn't read it, because he said it when nobody was saying it. That it's very, very politically dangerous to cross the people who view Israel as the most important thing to the U.S. for whatever reason.
How did you feel when you saw that guy in his IOF suit?
He was a nutcase. I mean, he's a nutcase. The guy, yeah, he's a nutcase. He's a nutcase. My own congressman, October 7th, yeah, nobody celebrates murder unless you're insane, right? So it doesn't mean you think that it was wonderful. Do it again. But this guy, my congressman, went to work in Congress and hung a huge Israeli flag like next to his office. It's insane. It's bizarre.
Well, what do you think about is Rashida Tlaib's flag also problematic? I think so.
Yeah, the Palestinian flag, right?
Yeah.
Oh, here's what's hilarious though, and now that there's heat on the Democrats over the fact that they've simply turned the other way as Netanyahu has brutalized and murdered, the 35,000 people. Nancy Pelosi came down to the floor debate wearing a Palestinian and American flag pin of all people. I mean, she out neocons the neocons when it comes to the Middle East. So it goes to show you that they feel the political heat, but they're such hypocrites and prostitutes that they'll do whatever it takes to maintain power.
Great. We have the Republicans and the Democrats, and the one thing they can agree on is that when we want a war, we don't care where it is. Not what we don't care where it is. They have their locations picked out. We have Russia and Ukraine, and then China and Israel. And either way, you're getting a war. The election.
Because they're still stuck in this mode that all of these places are Iraq or Libya, and they're not. You don't establish or Serbia, for God's sake. You don't establish air dominance over Russia and then proceed for the next 79 days to bomb the crap out of the place. It doesn't happen anymore, and they haven't been able to adapt to the fact that the U.S. and NATO, has thrown everything it can, with very few exceptions, at Russia through Ukraine. And they've lost, and they continue to lose, and will continue to lose. And they even, as you say, they even admit that they're losing, but they still think they want a war because deep down they think that everyone else is bluffing. Everyone else is bluffing, and we'll take them all out.
Well, I mean, aren't we taking Europe down with us? And what happens if we take the EU completely down? Can we handle a vassal continent in the state that we're in?
Well, I wonder what's going to happen in Europe. Because you are seeing the emergence of a resistance bloc, and I don't mean the big R resistance, but maybe a small R resistance. You've seen the rise of Viktor Orban, who, although he's been in power for a long time, he's really stood out and said, "Look, I don't want a war on our doorstep." And there's a lot of reasons, that a part of Transcarpathia was historically Hungarian, was taken after World War I. In the Treaty of Trianon, and the last thing he wants is those few ethnic Hungarians, many of them hold Hungarian passports, that remain in that area. They've already disproportionately been drafted into the army. So that's one way of ethnic cleansing that Zelensky has done. But he doesn't want the rest of them blown up in a conflict. I think that's primary of his concerns. But you have Viktor Orban emerging saying, no weapons transshipments. We're not going to give any weapons. We don't want to be involved. We want to talk peace. But now you have Robert Fico in Slovakia, who's emerged. And as the prime minister and the new president-elect in Slovakia is the same way. And I think you're starting to feel some rumblings through the rest of Europe that we might see some changes. But as you say, Europe has already been deindustrialized. Germany will never, at least for years, come back to anything approaching what it was before this absurd self-immolation, at the hands of, my God, Anthony Blinken. Of all the secretaries of state we've had, this is probably the least impressive.
Oh my God. It's like a wet piece of bread. Just like
you committed suicide for Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, completely unqualified people, no experience in this field. It's hard to believe.
How about I'm here as a Jew? Or I was like, what? Could you just be here as our Secretary of State? Could you do that?
Yeah, it's very pathetic, and I mean, of all the bad people we've had, it's really the banality of evil, right? I mean, these people are they are so corrupt and incompetent. They're such ciphers. I mean, at least what was her name now under Clinton? At least she was openly evil. I'm forgetting her name now. Um,
Madeleine Albright.
Madeleine Albright. Yeah, she's like, yeah, what the hell? We killed 1 million Iraqis. Who cares?
Mhm.
No biggie. You know.
I don't know
So
if these people are aware of how evil they are, because I remember people confronting AOC, and it was very like they don't understand. And maybe they've been around and entrenched for so long that they're like, this isn't evil. This is like what we have to do. This, like
yeah,
when she voted for the Iron Dome, we were like, what are you doing?
that's a
And she's
great
like,
point.
and you're like, do you even know? Like, they're so incompetent that they can be talked into these things. And then after the fact, I mean, you talk about Ron Paul. Ron Paul used to read everything. Now we have these people,
Yeah,
their aides are like men getting their nails done, and
yeah.
then like weird women, and they're like, don't even read the bills. And exactly what you said, they get talking points. And then where they're like, oh, that bill was bad. And it's just, I don't think that they even really know. I do want to ask you about, so a lot of times I think conservatives do this more. We call them Con Inc., the grifters that
Oh
you
God,
mentioned.
yeah.
Those guys. I don't mean real conservatives. Sorry, guys. When I say conservatives, I don't mean the real ones that are fine. I mean the Con Inc., the Ben Shapiro's. So they like to do the whole um, Israel runs the United States. Israel runs the United States, and I hate that, because it takes away the United States' agency. It takes away the fact that they're definitely involved in condoning all of this and facilitating it. So how do we get people to understand that it's not Israel running the United States?
Yeah, it's a great point. And just to go back to your previous point, and it relates to it, is that there's such circular thinking in Washington D.C. There nobody thinks outside the box. And I remember going into a hearing. I don't remember the exact bill, but it was a staff meeting, and the staff directors who are never changed. Members come and go, but they're permanent. We came in, all the staffers from the International Relations Committee came in and sat down, and they said, "Okay, guys, listen, we're going to do the Israel bill. Before we do anything else, I just want to let you know we gave APAC a look at it, and they're okay with it. So just in case you had any concerns." And that was like everyone just kind of side to side for you. Okay, that's a yes, from us. I mean, there's not even any discussion of whether it was good for the country or anything. It's APAC approved, so that's fine. But the lack of curiosity, the lack of ability to think outside the box in our political class is really it's astonishing. It'll be our downfall.
Well, do you think that we're just so concentrated on the Middle East because we've been in there for so long that we're like, that's the center of the universe. That's all that matters. We're going to war in the Middle East. And I keep on asking people, if you can tell me why the Ukraine war aligns with Israel's interests, then we can go down the road of Israel running the United States, because that war does not serve Israel's interests at all. It
Yeah.
actually created a stronger Russia and a stronger Iran. Same thing with the conflict in Taiwan. That doesn't align with Israel's interests. They're allies with China. So it's like the Middle East is not the center of the world. Do you think that people just feel that way because that's all we've talked about for the last 3 decades now?
Yeah, there's an interesting shift emerging, and I've only noticed it recently. And I think Putin, being so by nature conservative in the true sense of the word, um, but you're seeing the emergence of fault lines with Russia and Israel. And I think Putin has always been very careful to maintain good relationship with Israel and Netanyahu. But now you're starting to see with Lavrov and others, and even Putin himself. I think even the word sanctions was used a couple of days ago. So to your point, this war, as it's emerging, is not helping Israel whatsoever. They don't need to have Russia as an enemy at all. It's dangerous for them. And as far as Israel running things, I mean, you know, I've used the analogy. Someone needs to be able to put a hand on their shoulder and say, "You've had enough to drink. It's time to go home." And the U.S. is incapable of doing that right now, and it doesn't do Israel any favors. Look at the massive shift in public opinion on Israel over the past 6 months. I never thought I would see it in my lifetime. There was the Gallup poll that came out at the end of March, showing that the majority of Americans oppose Israel's actions in Gaza. That's never happened before.
Never.
The world is turning against Israel, vehemently, that can't be good for your survival, guys, even if you have nukes.
Even if you have nukes. I'm so glad you brought up the Russia-Israeli relations, because you agree with me. So many people give Russia such a hard time. What's Russia doing in Syria? Why aren't they helping the blah, blah, blah? I'm like, well, we're kind of busy up here a little bit. I don't know if you guys saw, but I've also noticed a deterioration. I talked to Andrei Martinov, that was months ago, and I said, you know, in your opinion, if it came down to it, if Iran and Israel went to war, what happens with Russia? And Russia has to pick a side, gun to your head. He says they have to pick Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have to pick Iran. I think that people are under the impression that because these Russians are in Israel, that like Russia's like hands off. Russia will bring them home before they would, you know, flat in Israel. So, I mean, Russia is obviously dedicated to her people, but there's international global repercussions for siding with Israel in this instance. And then most recently, I grabbed the ambassador to talk about Serbia, but I pulled him off record and we talked a little bit about the same thing. And the way that he was talking, it was very much like we are fed up, like we are at our wits' end. And what have you noticed? You mentioned Lavrov. What did he say? I believe that something about sanctions. Somebody else said after Putin was elected, he said the way that we handle Palestine will change. So what do you think is coming down the line?
I mean, I think, you know, your sources are, from at least from what I see, accurate. That, you know, the frustration level is high. Israel's not listening to anyone give them big brotherly advice, saying you guys need to take it down a notch. You know, Russian foreign policy is the opposite, I think, of U.S. foreign policy, because to me it seems like U.S. foreign policy is driven by this kind of messianic vision that we talked about. So it's very emotional. You know, it's intrinsically emotional. Whereas Russian foreign policy is the opposite. They don't get emotionally involved. They came to Syria's aid not because they were emotionally involved with Assad, because I think they realized and recognized the strategic importance of maintaining a naval base in Tartus and maintaining a presence and maintaining good relations with Syria. They're not driven by these emotional crusade-like like approaches to foreign policy. So I think that's why, even as they've probably been increasingly frustrated with Israel, they've kept it under wraps. But they also are very, very much sticklers to international law as they see it. And this goes against all norms of flouting the UN, Israel is, and flouting the International Court of Justice. And Russia, if anything, you could fault them for being, sort of overly bureaucratic. Yeah, sorry.
It's slow, overly
slow. Yeah. Overly slow, overly like dot every I and cross every T. Yeah, is how they've been. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm seeing as well.
I'm glad that you're seeing that too, because I see China and Russia as the kind of, and Iran now is kind of the world leaders in this multipolar inevitability, and it's important that those two kind of stand in. Now, somebody 2 nights ago, this is actually propaganda coming out of the Gulf states, which I love Saudi propaganda because it makes no sense. But whatever, last night I was told that the Palestinian conflict is just a proxy war between Russia and the United States. Okay, yeah. I'm not sure that I understand that view. Do you think you could explore that and maybe say where it comes from and debunk it?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem to ring a bell. I mean, everyone can have a theory. I mean, we could be sitting here doing tequila shots right now and come up with some theories. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe if someone explained it, it might make some sense. But I'm always wary of when an explanation is too facile. If everything just that's what conspiracy theories can be very interesting and fun to deal with. But I'm always wary of something that falls into place way too easily. Because these foreign policy actions are always usually a conflation of different interests and different motivations, and they sort of come together and then action takes place.
Well, so we're getting to the end of the show. I do want to know what you see you already kind of told us what you see for the future of Ukraine is kind of like abysmal, but what about this one? And I'm not talking about who wins and who loses on the ground. I'm talking about in the grand 30,000 foot level. Is Israel lose? What happens to the United States? Do we move on to Kurdistan? Is Kurdistan the new Israel? How do we fix this? The protests, are we on the brink of a revolution? Because I keep telling people keep saying, like my Slavic producer, who keeps saying nothing will happen. But I think people forget that our college protests during Vietnam started a kind of a significant cultural revolution. So what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, revolutions can be subtle things as well. They don't necessarily they're not necessarily the comic book or the Hollywood, style of things. And I'll just give one example. Is the Ron Paul revolution? He ran for president twice. He didn't win. By all popular measures, he didn't change the world. But all of a sudden, people started talking about the role of the Federal Reserve in creating the warfare welfare state, in being behind the bailing out and backing of Wall Street over Main Street, and many other things. So I think, in a small way, that was a kind of revolution. We'll never not be talking about the Fed again. We'll never not be talking about peace again. And so I think a revolution is taking place now, and it has to do with and it's not coalesced yet. It doesn't have sort of a nice branding about it. But I think, and maybe I'm just being sort of a Pollyanna here, but I think America is starting to understand the danger and the folly of our interventionist foreign policy. And I just wish that Dr. Paul says this all the time too. I wish I was a better communicator and I could just say a Shazam argument that people would say, yes, that's it. It's hard. We all have to deal with our limitations.
Yeah, I'm struggling to figure out, because I'm a very much like, I've been saying this whole time, this is not a religious war, this is a class war, this is that. How do we take these, what kind of can be looked at as like hoity-toity yuppie protests, and try to make the connection to a class consciousness and get the working classes? We need MAGA. Like, this is them too. Like, this is, how do we get that? How do we kind of make that collaboration happen? How do we convince the MAGA community that this is a means to an end?
Yeah, I think we're doing that, and I think that's why they're panicking. I mean, I think that's why they're trying to tar everyone in this protest movement as a crazed Antifa radical, woke type of person. The last thing they would want to admit is people like us are seeing that there's some validity in what they're saying, and God forbid if the right, for lack of a better word, the non-grifter right, starts to wake up. And we're seeing some of these figures on the right starting to wake up, and they're paying the price right now. Some of them are being fired from the Daily Wire, so I think that is starting to take place, but it may not look the way we expect it to look. I guess that would be the only thing I would say.
Yeah, I worry that it might just result in more authentic anti-Semitism, which I've also seen.
Which you see a lot of it, yeah, and it's
okay
a cheap
backlash. Like, I'm like, it's okay with the backlash. We could get through that as long as we can figure out how to mash this up. This isn't college kids pro-Palestine against pro-Israel at this point. It's evolved into something completely different. And I think that I have a lot of hope. I mean, I don't mind the Zoomers. I think the Zoomers are funny, but they make the greatest memes. But
yeah.
they're at least useful. They're better than the boomers. But I think that something's happening, and they're giving me quite a bit of hope. Do you feel the same?
I didn't, because I just was turning into like a crotchety old man. But now that I'm seeing this shift, I'm actually quite optimistic. And you're right; they're very clever. They're very agile, intellectually agile, and they're not encumbered. They haven't inherited all of this like mental baggage that the boomers certainly carried with them. But even later generations, I mean, they seem to have jettisoned all this, and now they're like, what? Hold on a minute. You can't just go killing 20,000 people. That's not right. This sucks. So that's healthy. I like that.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. You have to come back again. Can you tell our listeners what you're up to? I'm sure you have a lot going on this summer around Paul Institute, all of it.
Okay, thanks very much. And it was awesome from my end as well. So thanks so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this. I started following you in a previous iteration right when the war started in 2022, and you've been a constant companion. So I appreciate all the work that you've done. It's been tremendous. We're at ronpaulinstitute.org. We do a daily broadcast at noon Eastern time live on Rumble. We will have a conference in August coming up in Washington, D.C. Last year we had Max Blumenthal, we had Anya Parampil. We are all about a left-right coalition, or beyond left-right coalition. We have Dennis Kucinich on our board of directors, as well as Judge Andrew Napolitano. So you see, there's a it's all about building a coalition in the areas that we agree upon, and that's what's so important to us. We even had Julian Assange speak at one of our conferences before they snatched him and put him into his terrible cage. So I would love to see people of all stripes who care about peace and care about our future at our events. So just keep your eye on ronpaulinstitute.org website, and we'll be announcing those dates soon.
Well, I just informed our producer that we're going. So we'll see you guys
cool.
at
the That's cool. Keep in touch. Well,
you'll be back on before that. This was great because I don't get to talk to people that have an understanding of what American fascism is and what it will look like. And we got to get people on board because I'm like, it's happening, guys. I don't know what we're going to do. And we need to get a plan. Then I love this coalition building because that's what our platform is for too. So thank you so much, Daniel. I will be out with the clips later on this weekend, probably. Tomorrow night, we have Carl Jia and Zhang Yu, the rapper from Taiwan. I can't wait to set them right. Thanks again, Daniel. And we will see you guys next time.